You said something slightly awkward in a meeting 3 days ago. You've replayed it at least a dozen times since. You're convinced everyone in that room remembers it, judges you for it, still thinks about it. Here's what real psychological research actually found. Almost nobody else remembers it at all. Not because people don't care about you, because human attention doesn't work the way your anxious brain assumes it does. This is called the spotlight effect, and it's one of the most well-documented, quietly life-changing findings in social psychology. Today, we're going to look at the real experiment that proved it, why your brain consistently gets this wrong, and how understanding it can genuinely lower the social anxiety you carry every single day. In 2000, psychologist Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky at Cornell University designed a now-famous experiment to test how accurately people predict how much others actually notice about them. Here's the setup. Researchers asked individual participants to put on a T-shirt featuring a large image of musician Barry Manilow, deliberately chosen because it was considered, at the time, mildly embarrassing to the college-age participants. Each participant then walked into a room full of other students for a short period. Afterward, the participant was asked to estimate what percentage of the people in that room had noticed the shirt. On average, participants estimated that around 50% of the room had noticed the embarrassing shirt. When the researchers actually asked the observers in the room whether they'd noticed it, the real number was closer to 25%, roughly half of what participants had predicted. People wearing the shirt consistently significantly overestimated how much attention their appearance was actually receiving from everyone around them. The researchers ran a related version of the experiment with a non-embarrassing, neutral shirt and found the same basic pattern. Participants overestimated how much others noticed, whether the shirt was something to be embarrassed about or not. This wasn't really about embarrassment specifically. It was about a consistent bias in how accurately people predict the attention of others in general. Gilovich and his colleagues named this the spotlight effect. The tendency to believe that other people are paying far more attention to your appearance, mistakes, and behavior than they actually are, because you are understandably the center of your own attention, and your brain mistakenly assumes you occupy a similarly central position in everyone else's. Understanding why this bias happens, and how consistently it's been replicated since, changes how you can actually use this research in daily life. Let's look at the mechanism, and then the practical takeaway. The core mechanism behind the spotlight effect is what psychologists call an egocentric bias in judging others' perspectives. You experience your own thoughts, appearance, and actions with total, constant awareness. You are, quite literally, unable to stop noticing yourself. And your brain uses that overwhelming personal awareness as a flawed reference point for estimating how much other people are noticing you too. But other people are running the exact same internal process, centered entirely on themselves. Everyone in that room in Gilovich's experiment was just as absorbed in their own thoughts, appearance, and concerns as the participant wearing the shirt was absorbed in theirs. The room wasn't full of people intensely focused on one participant's T-shirt. It was full of people each running their own personal spotlight, mostly pointed at themselves. This same effect has since been replicated across a wide range of contexts beyond clothing. Studies have found similar overestimation patterns for perceived mistakes in conversations, perceived awkwardness in social interactions, and perceived visibility of minor personal flaws. The consistent finding across this research: people are dramatically less focused on you, your mistakes, and your appearance than your own mind assumes, because they're each running the same self-focused spotlight you are. That it's worth being precise here. The spotlight effect isn't a vague motivational claim that nobody cares what you think. It's a specific, measurable cognitive bias with a documented direction and rough magnitude. In Gilovich's original study, roughly double the actual level of attention was predicted compared to what was actually recorded. This matters because it means the anxious thought everyone noticed that isn't simply an opinion to argue against with willpower. It's a specific, well-documented prediction error your brain makes by default in a fairly consistent, replicable direction. Once you know the bias reliably runs in one direction, overestimating attention, not underestimating it, you have a concrete, evidence-based reason to discount those anxious predictions, rather than simply hoping they're wrong. Here are 3 practical ways to apply this finding directly. First, treat the anxious thought everyone noticed as statistically unlikely, not as a fact to investigate. Given the direction and rough size of the bias found in the research, a reasonable default assumption is that your estimate of how much others noticed a mistake or awkward moment is roughly double the reality, which means most of what feels like obvious, memorable social exposure is, to everyone else, minor and quickly forgotten. Second, remember that everyone else is running their own spotlight, pointed at themselves. The people you're worried are judging you are very likely preoccupied with their own version of the exact same worry, directed at themselves, which is part of why social anxiety so often creates a room full of people each privately convinced they're the most watched person in it, when in reality, attention is far more evenly and thinly spread than anyone assumes. Third, use this specifically to lower the perceived cost of taking social risks. Speaking up in a meeting, trying something new in public, wearing something unconventional. The anticipated social cost of these actions is, according to this research, consistently inflated in your mind before you act. Knowing that the real audience attention is roughly half of what you're predicting can make the actual risk of visible, everyday social action feel, and statistically be, considerably smaller than it initially seems. Let's bring this together. The spotlight effect, demonstrated clearly in Gilovich, Medvec, and Savitsky's 2000 research, shows that people consistently and measurably overestimate how much others notice their appearance, mistakes, and minor social missteps, often by roughly double the actual level of attention being paid. This isn't because people don't care about you. It's because everyone is running their own internal spotlight, pointed almost entirely at themselves, which leaves far less attention left over for noticing the small things you're privately convinced were glaringly obvious. This is genuinely useful, practical information, not just a comforting platitude. The next time you replay an awkward moment, remember that the actual audience for it was very likely half the size and half the attentiveness that your mind is currently insisting it was, and that whoever was in the room was almost certainly far too occupied with their own spotlight to give yours the sustained attention you're imagining. So here's the question. What's one thing you've been quietly replaying and assuming everyone noticed that, statistically, almost nobody actually did? Tell me in the comments. This is Turn Wiser, and I'll see you in the next one. A 2000 Cornell study had participants wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a room. Then guess how many people noticed? They estimated 50%. The real number was 25%, half their prediction. This is the spotlight effect, a measurable bias where you consistently overestimate how much others notice your appearance, mistakes, and awkward moments. It happens because everyone is running their own internal spotlight, pointed almost entirely at themselves. The next time you replay an embarrassing moment convinced everyone remembers it, the research says they probably don't. You were never as watched as you assumed.